Jimmy Low. Does that name ring a bell? If it does, congratulations, you're in the 2% elite in the fanbase. You should feel extremely proud of yourself because your memory is so good, chances are you have knowledge of some of the most useless things out there. If you don't, well, don't feel too bad about it. I am happy to report that you're one of the normal ones, which at times might feel dull, but at least you can rest assured knowing that there's nothing wrong with you. The RGG games, with their intricate stories, overarching plot lines, and their variety of settings, always tend to introduce new characters into the fray, new faces for us to get to know, and either befriend or be enemies of. And depending on who you ask, the characters presented in a game can sometimes make or break a game for them. Over the years, we've gotten a whole bunch of them that made a first appearance in certain games, garnered the love and attention of many fans, and went on to return in subsequent games. An example of that would be a good number of characters from the Judgment games that appear in both games, such as Saori, Higashi, and Sugiura, and so on. When done correctly, this connection can really help bridge the games together and create a more consistent story and a believable world. Of course, not all characters are this lucky, but some characters still leave a lasting impression on the player despite being confined to a singular game. Some examples include Rikiya and Mine from Yakuza 3, or Tanimura from Yakuza 4, or Somiya from Yakuza 6. And I'm sure there's many more examples that you're thinking of that I haven't mentioned. Now, despite never coming back, the characters that I did mention had at least one or several moments where they really got to shine at their best and make a name for themselves among the community, even if perhaps they had room for improvement in terms of writing. But as I'm sure you're aware, dear viewer, RGG at times will have a habit that only backfires on their games and the tales they tell. They may sometimes introduce a little too many characters, or heck, maybe they just devote a little too much time to a specific subject matter or part within the story, and some of that time could have been used to flesh out something else. Sometimes it gets to a borderline laughable point that makes you think maybe not including a specific character or few would have made the presentation of a story somewhat better and maybe even less convoluted in a way that only benefits the story. Such is the case of the character that we'll talk about today. Jimmy Low from Yakuza 6, the son of Big Low, the leader of the Sayo Triad. Because I'm sure this character left a giant impression on all of you, just in case, we'll go through how this character was presented, his role in the story, and then we can perhaps shift on to the opinionated part of the video where we discuss his utility and how he could have been executed better. I can't believe I'm making a video on Jimmy of all people. Yakuza 6 follows Kiryu after the climactic showdown that happened at the end of the last game, where he and a whole bunch of his allies worked together to thwart the plans of the Omi Alliance's 7th chairman of taking over the Tojo clan and Kamurocho as well. The final fight against Aizawa left him in a critical state, especially since he was already wounded by a gunshot prior to the fight. Long story short, because of all the public property damage, he and the Tojo clan's bigwigs get arrested. While in prison, public opinion of Haruka takes a nosedive after she admitted considering Kiryu, a former Yakuza, her family. This causes her to leave behind the orphanage and everything she's ever known to keep the other kids out of trouble. Kiryu eventually gets out of prison, checks with the orphanage, and finds out that Haruka's gone missing. It wouldn't take much longer for him to find out that she's had a child and had been in an accident that hospitalized her. The mystery of these circumstances would be the center of the game's focus, and along the way you meet many suspects and characters of interest. One moment you're suspecting the Tojo clan to be involved, and the next it might be someone else entirely. One faction that's involved in all of this is a new group introduced in this game called the Sayo Triad. You're introduced to them very early into the game, and you even see one of their strongest guys, a guy named Ed. It's not long after the first meeting with Ed that we and Kiryu get to know about Jimmy Low. To be specific, it's as early as chapter 2. Kiryu's investigating the car accident that hit Haruka with a detective called Honjo. The detective brings up conflicts between the Tojo and the Sayo, and he says maybe Haruka was just unfortunate enough to get caught up in the crossfire of one such clash. This is where Jimmy gets introduced. But here's the extremely unserious thing about it. From a retrospective point of view, it's really difficult not to immediately point and laugh at him here, because the moment he's introduced to us, the player, he's already dead. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we get to see a new character that actually plays something of a role in the main story, but the first thing you see of him is his bloody, rotting corpse. Literally just a dead body JPEG. Now apparently, 3 months prior to the conversation between Kiryu and Honjo, he was found dead, and that just sort of fueled the war between the Tojo and Sayo even more, especially with him being supposedly the leader's only son and the heir to the Triad. We don't know for sure if it was the Tojo clan that killed him, and that's another mystery that they want you to keep at the back of your head for now. But let's just, you know, get this straight. This guy being introduced dead can only mean we get flashbacks of him from here on, and that is what ends up happening. The flashbacks help us understand how he fits into this whole narrative better, but unless I'm forgetting, it's not until way later that he gets brought up. About 5 or 6 chapters later, we meet the big man, Big Lo, in chapter 7, and then in chapter 8, Somiya approaches us wanting to accompany us to a meeting with Big Lo. This is where he brings up Jimmy, and Kiryu asks him whether or not the Tojo was responsible for his death, but he says that he has no idea who killed him. Now keep in mind, Somiya only wanted to accompany Kiryu here to attempt to kill Big Lo, but that's something we won't really get into because it's not the focus. After Kiryu and Somiya fight their way through the ruins of Shangri-La, which used to be a brothel, they meet Big Lo at the top. And despite what Somiya said earlier, Big Lo seems to reaffirm that the Tojo clan did indeed kill his son and that he's still pissed about it. And this time, Somiya does confirm it, so he was lying earlier. At the end of the next chapter, chapter 9, leading into chapter 10, this is where we first get to learn of Yuta's true nature of being the younger brother of Jimmy Lo. Yuta was just thrown elsewhere because of China's one-child policy, and also to avoid any chance of succession wars happening. And we hear as much in a cutscene later, but Big Lo also had intentions of using him as a backup heir in case Jimmy kicked the bucket, and, well, he did. So at this point, we're now in chapter 10, and there's only like 3 chapters left, and we still have not a single idea as to how this Jimmy fella was like. Was he a force to be reckoned with? Is that why he got assassinated? Was he just the second coming of Akimoto? What was his personality like? Does he like his coffee black or with cream and sugar? We have no idea. Chapter 11 focuses on Yuta trying to sort of get revenge on his dad, but also he has a reckless act of self-sacrifice to get the Sayo Triad to leave Haruka, Haruto, and everyone else alone. There's not much about Jimmy here, so let's go into chapter 12, where we see the most of Jimmy out of every other chapter. So after stopping Yuta from killing his dad, we get both of them out of the scorched little Asia, and the chapter kicks off with Big Lo having a dream or a flashback. This flashback shows us a small Jimmy and a baby Yuta. Jimmy is shown to be an inquisitive boy who is fond of his brother, but Big Lo gets kind of emotional and tells him that they can't keep his brother for the good of many, quote unquote. For the good of many, you must be willing to cast aside your family, or something like that. It's worth pointing out that even though it's not really explored all that much, you can sort of see the start of the corruption of the young Jimmy and likely fill in the blanks as to how he had to adapt to the mafia lifestyle. He had no idea what his dad was talking about at the time and seemed to just enjoy being around his family. Back to Big Lo. He hugs his son, and then it cuts to many years later, shortly before Jimmy's death. They're now at Big Lo's office, and Jimmy is nagging at his dad to listen to him. This is where we truly get a glimpse of how Jimmy is like. Jimmy has big plans of wanting to expand the influence of the Sayo Triad in Japan. He brings up tagging up with Ed to wipe out a whole bunch of Yakuza. That's a funny image, isn't it? Imagine this guy next to a scary-ass dude like Ed. It's hard to wrap my head around this, but I always assumed this is the game's way of saying that Jimmy was at least somewhat capable as a fighter. Anyway, so he wants his dad's permission to go ahead and enact their expansion plans. Big Lo isn't having any of it though. He thinks Jimmy's going to bite off more than he can chew, and plus they also have to abide by an agreement with the Yome Alliance to not interfere at all in Japan. This frustrates Jimmy because he thinks they're just being weak that way. So clearly, Jimmy was a man of ambition. Big Lo reminds him who he's talking to and tells him to simmer down with his ideas. His dad takes out a cigar and Jimmy lights it up for him, which shows that he might still have some semblance of respect towards him. And that may further be proved by how, right after this, he calls him dad before he corrects himself and says, boss. He tries to plead once again with his dad, bringing up different justifications for why now is the right time to do all these grand plans. He begs his dad to give him a chance to prove himself. He brings up an idea that is the equivalent of playing with fire. So, I'm sure a lot of you are at least familiar with the secret of Onomichi that Yakuza 6 really hyped up, and how that was supposed to be a huge deal that no one was supposed to know about. Well, Jimmy proposed that they use the knowledge of the secret of Onomichi to blackmail Chairman Kurusu, the leader of the Yome Alliance, into helping them fight the Tojo clan in Kamurocho and then taking over the city while they still have the Yome in their grasp. His dad thinks he's being reckless and continuously tries to warn him why everything he's saying is a bad idea, but Jimmy never really listens, and at this point he's asking his dad what the secret of Onomichi is so he can take matters into his own hands. Bigelow says they can't really use the secret to blackmail anymore, but before he can say why, the cutscene comes to an end and he wakes up to talk to Kiryu and the others at Serena. There's a sizable info dump here, so we are definitely not going to cover everything, but Bigelow reveals that Jimmy went behind his back and conspired with Iwami, the son of the head of the Yome Alliance. Then we get a cutscene that takes us back to a moment we see in the beginning of the game, the fire at the old Little Asia. It's revealed that when Sugai was raising a toast here, he was talking to none other than Bigelow, Iwami, and Jimmy. Iwami breaks the ice by saying that he's pleased with how things are going and that this is all thanks to Jimmy, who he thinks is a worthy heir. Jimmy looks like a high school girl who was just complimented by her crush. Jimmy says that it's not often that his dad compliments him, but maybe today will be different. Yes, daddy issues, a Yakuza classic. Unfortunately for Jimmy, it doesn't take long for us to find out how utterly livid his dad was for going against his wishes. Whenever Bigelow and Jimmy would speak to each other here, it's in Chinese specifically, so that they can try to avoid making things awkward for the others. But Bigelow is visibly angry, so Sugai asks if anything's wrong. He ignores him and just tells Jimmy to try and call off the deal and that they should leave now. Before doing so, he tells Iwami to give his regards to his father. Iwami gets up and tells Bigelow that no one else knows about the deal to try to reassure him. And then, like it's nothing, he tells him in Chinese that this isn't a deal they can walk away from. So basically, he understood every single word that the father and son said to each other. Bigelow chuckles and calls him a devil. Clearly, he was underestimated, and then asks why they can't walk away from the deal. Iwami drops a bit of a bomb that takes Bigelow's anger on his son to a next level. So, the Yome Alliance, which Iwami and his father are a part of, always assumed that the Sayo Triad are aware of the nature of the secret of Onomichi, and that they could use it to blackmail them at any chance, so they didn't want to mess with them. However, a few days prior to this cutscene, Iwami and Jimmy talked over dinner, and it only took a few drinks for Jimmy to get plastered, then badmouth his dad, and give away the Triad's secrets, including the fact that they don't actually know what the secret of Onomichi is, so they don't have any power over the Yome Alliance.
Listen, you son of a bitch! What the fuck's your problem? I'll beat your goddamn ass, you son of a bitch!
Jimmy, now being frustrated, tells his dad that it's no big deal that they know, but Iwami himself is talking so confidently and openly about how Jimmy was so easy to manipulate, and even tells him that he should have listened to his dad. Now obviously, from this cutscene alone, we can infer that despite the qualities we've seen from Jimmy earlier, which indicated that he might have been a competent organized crime member, all of those kind of fall apart here. It barely took any effort for Iwami to manipulate him. Deep down, he has resentment against his dad and thus was rebelling in his own way. Unfortunately, this hot-headedness combined with his poor judgment and lack of perception cost him his own life, as it later turns out that the one who gave the order to kill him was Iwami himself. Poetic. Once again, I can't believe I'm making a video on this goddamn idiot. Okay, so we know exactly how he was involved in the events of Yakuza 6 now, and what he was like, and all that good stuff. So let's move on to the opinions and discussions and just actually rambling about this character. And you know, as I'm going through this, I'm realizing how tragically horrible things fell apart with this character, writing-wise. Like, I already knew it was bad, but god damn, dude. I think Jimmy had the ingredients for a really intriguing character, and no, really, hear me out. It's clear from what I said in this video that he is very much involved in the plot of Yakuza 6. But first of all, who the hell decided to pick the names Jimmy Low and Bigelow? Because I want to have a word with them. I don't know if it's just me, but god, it's so hard to take them seriously with names like those. And I mean, dude, have you seen how inexcusably generic he looks like? Like, goddamn, put a tiny bit more effort into it, please. Guy looks like a babyfied version of Arai from Yakuza 4. I don't know how old he's supposed to be in Yakuza 6, but like, come on, dude. And can we just go back again and reiterate the fact that the first time you hear about this dude, he's dead? No ifs and buts about it, he just ceased to exist by the time you get to know about him. Here, have this JPEG of a new character. By the way, his name is Jimmy Lowe. Hope you like him. And we haven't even talked about how we haven't seen this guy in action at all. Anytime he's on the screen, he's either yapping or dead. Okay, so I think we all agree that Jimmy is not in any way a cool character. But I think it would have been cool if they showed us a glimpse of him tagging up with Ed, fighting some Tojo guys or something. Not looking like this though. The dude desperately needs a makeover. Essentially, despite all the attempts at giving Jimmy... can't believe how dumb his name is. Despite trying to give him a role in the story, he was unfortunately destined to serve a meager role of a major scapegoat. What do I mean by that? Well, he tried to prove his worth to his father and thus the Sayo Triad, but because he's too much of an idiot, he only ended up playing right into the hands of someone who was smart enough to make use of that fact, that being Iwami. And when it comes down to it, that's really the bulk of the role that Jimmy was given, just being a puppet of the mastermind in this story, an extremely forgettable character that was there to essentially allow other characters to move the plot forward. Yakuza 6 has this overarching theme of parents and their children, and not always in a biological sense. And they see multiple examples of this going through the story. An example other than the one we're covering today is Hirose and his boys, or Chairman Kurusu and his son Iwami. And I think the overall message it wants to convey about parents not connecting well with their children is conveyed well enough. But the fact remains that Jimmy was a dumbass dummy with a funny name and a highly memeable design. I'm gonna be real with you. It's only at this point in the script that I'm like, man, I think I should have picked a better character to talk about. And that's saying something given that I made a video about Terada not long ago. But you know what? We're here now, so I think I'll just commit to this. I think there might be one Jimmy fan out there who would be happy to see this video. You never know. Jimmy fan, I see you in the audience. Show yourself right now. Anyway, this brings us to the end of the video. I honestly don't know what more to say about this character except that he existed at some point. Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I feel so much emptiness. Why did I do this? Why did I make this video? Thank you guys so much for giving the video the time of your day. It really does mean a lot. I know this video might be very random, but really, thank you guys for watching this. I hope it was at least something of an enjoyable watch, and I can at least proudly say that I made a video on Jimmy Lowe from Yakuza 6 now, so I guess that's an accomplishment. Anyway, you guys take care, stay safe, and stay healthy, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye now.